President.
I recognize the senator from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Coons for his leadership on trying to restore international order. And that's what we're talking about. You know, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee is talking about reforms to the way we deliver aid. And look, 10 days ago, I had a conversation with Senator Graham, who's the chairman of the committee that has jurisdiction over spending in the State Department. And I'm now the ranking member of that committee. And we talked about the opportunities for reform. We talked about the need to align American foreign policy with USAID. And to the extent that we're all alarmed at the Belt and Road Initiative, to the extent that we watch what China does internationally, and we think, how smart of them. We should do something like that. The response should be to better align USAID with the State Department's objectives, with our geopolitical strategy, but not to eliminate our power internationally. And I think the point that has to be understood right now, because some Republicans that I'm talking to kind of agree that we don't want to get rid of foreign aid, we don't want to get rid of USAID, but they want to institute some reforms, they want to have a negotiation, fine. Understand two things. One, this freeze is just flatly illegal. And let me explain what I mean. Every year we pass an appropriations bill. And unlike in state governments, where if you appropriate money to something, a governor can actually restrict those funds. But our Constitution provides, and our statutes provide, that when we appropriate money, as the Article I branch, the executive branch has the obligation to see to it that it's done in a way that is meritorious. But they don't get to decide not to spend the money. If they didn't like a particular provision in a bill, they could have threatened a veto or been part of the negotiation or whatever. But once it's enacted, it is literally the law of the land. The other thing is, USAID is a creature of federal law. It is true that it was originally established by an executive order. That's true. But that sort of misses the point. There was an executive order. Look, if you establish something by an executive order and nothing follows, then the next president gets to revoke that executive order, the thing vanishes. That is a total authority that a president has. But what happened was, USAID was established by executive order, and then Congress made a law. So it doesn't matter whether it was originally made by executive order or memo or speech or someone sang a jingle to establish USAID. It's now a federal law, and you don't get to waive it because you don't like it. I just don't understand. Look, there will be a Democratic president. And I want people to do the thought experiment of how unbelievably angry you will be when President whoever comes in and says, I'm canceling the F-35. I'm canceling a road in your community because I don't like it, because it doesn't fit with my ideology because I won. That is not how this works. And it is sometimes very frustrating, especially when you're the majority party, to understand that all you did was decide, you just won to be at the helm of the executive branch and to be at the helm of the legislative branch, but that didn't mean that you won a monarchy. That doesn't mean that you get to start just issuing memos and that's the new law. And I think one of the problems right now is that there really are a bunch of billionaires who really do think, it ought to run like a business. If what you mean by that is things ought to be efficient and that we ought to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, count me in. But if what you mean by that is that there is one CEO and that CEO tells everybody what to do and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks or what the rules or the laws are, that's not our system of government. That is not the way this works. So that's number one. This thing is illegal. You can hate USAID and still hate what's happening to it. Because it'll happen if this is allowed to stand, it'll happen to a department you like. It'll happen to an initiative you like. It'll happen to something that you want to protect in your community or that you consider important for the country. And so this isn't about the particulars of USAID. Let's have a debate about USAID, but let's have it in the context of the constraints of the Constitution and laws of the United States. That's not a provocative partisan statement. It's a statement of fact that we all swear an oath to the Constitution and laws of the United States, and the context in which we have fights about things is within the four corners of statutory law. And if you hate a statute, we all know what to do. There's still literally, they say put a bill in a hopper. It's the year 2025. We still have a hopper. You can still drop a physical bill in the hopper. You've got a proposal. Great. But not, I've got a proposal, let's draft an executive memorandum and start acting like there's a chief executive officer of the whole country. That is not how this works. The second point is this. People are dying now. People are dying now. So as we think about, what kind of reforms do we want to make? Why don't we align this better with the United States foreign policy? I want to target wokeism or whatever the hell someone wants to think about the USAID budget. All of that is the kind of thing that you can do while you keep the agency open. My God, I talked to Lindsay the other day and I said, it would be really interesting because we know administrative tasks are going to get easier and more efficiently done with the advent of AI. And I thought, well, it would be pretty cool to try to figure out if we could drive the overhead rate in the USAID budget down over a period of time so that more aid goes to the people and the places that we intended to go to. Now, if there was a for-profit or a nonprofit and you were in the process of trying to become more efficient, right? And you were looking at a bunch of people who did a bunch of things, and you think, we need an electronic system for this, or we need a better way to do this, we need a better mousetrap. You don't shut the whole operation down and then figure it out. I'm looking at the presiding officer, I'm looking at the senator from Delaware. Both of you have run big operations, private sector, public sector. And this is no way to run a railroad. You don't shut something down in order to reform it. You take seriously the proposition that there should be reform. You get aggressive, there should be no sacred cows, all of that. But what they did was they stormed into the offices of a federal building, sent everybody home, broke into the secure conference facilities, broke into the SCIFs, locked people out of their emails. Does that sound like the United States of America? It really, honestly, does not sound like the United States of America to me. These people were not elected. There is a law in place, and it doesn't matter what you think about this particular agency. I got agencies I don't like. I got agencies that I think are spending too much money or too little money. You know what I do about that? I introduce a bill to change it because I believe in the American system of government. And part of what we have to establish here is, do we believe in the American system of government? Or has the internet broken our brains to the point where this is just another partisan fight? They stormed into a federal office and purged employees. Think about how you would view that if it were some faraway place. Think about how the press would cover that if it were in Africa or Central Asia or South America or Central America. They would characterize it appropriately as autocratic behavior. So this isn't some small little partisan dispute among a bunch of progressives who are bleeding hearts and worried about people and suffering and all that. This is about literally, do we uphold the rule of law in the United States? And so many people who are in the United States Senate who care about this country fled that kind of authoritarianism. My grandparents, my wife's grandparents, I won't presume anyone else's personal history, but frankly, most people come to the United States to flee those kinds of behaviors. And so we are here to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States. Mr. President, they really are implementing Project 2025. And I have to say, like back in the campaign, I was wary about making that accusation that they're going to implement this book, right? And I just asked, I was trying to figure out if I could read the whole Project 2025 into the record, and at least one of the, well, I'll just say it, ChatGPT told me to take 119 hours, and so I'm not going to do that this evening. But I will tell you that if you read it, you will understand that they're actually really implementing Project 2025. And Trump was smart enough during the campaign to realize that Democrats had broken through and made it clear that they have a very specific plan. And part of the problem for Democrats was, it was always about Trump and his personality, and that wore people down. Like it was, tell me what you're going to do for me. Tell me what they're going to do for me or not for me. And so this was an area where Democrats thought, hey, this is policy. This is what's actually going to happen. And Trump was clever enough to say, I don't know anything about that. Oh, that guy, and I just met him, kind of thing. But I want you to understand that more than 2/3 of Trump's executive orders and actions during his first week were inspired by that manifesto put together by the Heritage Foundation. And the reason for that is simple. Many of the authors of Project 2025 now hold or are nominated to hold senior roles in the Trump administration. And that includes OMB Director nominee Russ Vought, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, Senior Counselor Peter Navarro, Border Czar Tom Homan. And so it is worth examining in some detail this 900-page document that is the basis for the avalanche of chaos and pain and confusion from the Trump administration. I want to read the opener in Project 2025. History teaches, I just want you to be clear, this is not me. History teaches that a president's power to implement an agenda is at its apex during the administration's opening days. To execute requires a well-conceived, coordinated, and unified plan and a trained and committed cadre of personnel to implement it. In recent election cycles, presidential candidates normally began transition planning in the late spring of election year or even after the nomination was secured. That is too late. The federal government's complexity and growth advance at a seemingly logarithmic rate every 4 years. For conservatives to have a fighting chance to take on the administrative state, the work must start now. The entirety of this effort is to support the next conservative president. In the winter of 1980, the fledgling Heritage Foundation handed to President-elect Ronald Reagan the inaugural mandate for leadership. This collective work by conservative thought leaders and former government hands, most of whom were not part of Heritage, set out policy prescriptions, agency by agency, for the incoming president. The book literally put the conservative movement and Reagan on the same page, and the revolution that followed might never have been, save for this band of committed and volunteer activists. With this volume, we have gone back to the future, and then some. It is not 1980. In 2023, the game has changed. The long march of cultural Marxism, I'm not really sure what that is, those are my words, through our institutions has come to pass. The federal government is a behemoth weaponized against American citizens and conservative values, with freedom and liberty under siege as never before. The task at hand to reverse this tide and restore our republic to its original moorings is too great for any one conservative policy shop to spearhead. It requires the collective action of our movement. With the quickening approach of 2025, we have 2 years and one chance to get it right. Project 2025 is more than 50 and growing of the nation's leading conservative organizations joining forces to prepare and seize the day. As the axiom goes, personnel is policy, and we need a new generation of Americans to answer the call and come to serve. This book is functionally an invitation for you, the reader, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, and Mrs. Smith, to come to Washington to support those who can. Our goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state. Under State Department civil servants, since the U.S. founding, the Department of State has been the American government's designated tool of engagement with foreign governments and people throughout the world. Country names, borders, leaders, technology, and peoples have changed in the more than 2 centuries since the founding, but the basics of diplomacy remain the same. Although the department has evolved throughout the years, at least in the modern era, there is one significant problem that the next president must address to be successful. There are scores of fine diplomats who serve the president's agenda, often helping to shape and interpret that agenda. At the same time, however, in all the administrations, there is a tug of war between presidents and bureaucracies, and that resistance is much starker under conservative presidents, due largely to the fact that large swaths of the State Department's workforce are left-wing and predisposed to disagree with the conservative president's policy vision. I just want to stop here, and I want everyone to understand what they're saying, which is they're targeting a department of the federal government because they have assessed, I don't know if it's true or not because I don't actually think like that it's got like a liberal lean. And I got to tell you, I'm sure the FBI membership has a conservative lean. My guess is ICE has a conservative lean. I don't know about the Department of Interior and what their political lean is. And I am just actually confused as to why anybody thinks it's legitimate to try to dismantle a department of the federal government because there is a point of view about the politics of the individual employees. Now back to the 2025. It should not and cannot be this way. The American people need and deserve a diplomatic machine fully focused on the national interest as defined through the election of a president who sets the domestic and international agenda for the nation. Well, listen. The law, as it relates to the State Department, is made by Congress. And many smart people have described the Constitution in the area of foreign policy as an invitation to struggle. It was intentionally vague. We were supposed to have a tug and pull. And it's true that the President of the United States is the commander-in-chief and has broad foreign policy authorities. It's not true that any president can ignore a duly enacted federal law. And that is what is being asked for us to tolerate. And I was prepared on election night to say, I hate this result. We lost the trifecta. As a party, we've got to do some soul searching and figure out why we didn't just lose the Electoral College, we lost the popular vote. So I was prepared to do some thinking and say, we're in for some conservative outcomes. We're in for some policy outcomes that I am absolutely going to hate. But what's happening right now is unlawful. I know we're outnumbered, 53 to 47 in the Senate and like a 2 or 3 vote margin in the House, and we lost the presidency. Fair enough. So there will be conservative policy for 2 or 4 years. And I don't like it, but that's the way the ball bounces sometimes politically. What's happening right now is not the ball bouncing a particular way politically, but someone just deciding that they're in charge of the American government and they don't care what the law says. And I just don't think anybody should be willing to tolerate that. I want to quote Project 2025 on Medicare. Because I want everybody to understand they came for the State Department first because everybody understands that until there's an Ebola outbreak that reaches our shores, until there's international disorder that reaches our borders, until our reputation is damaged, until you see it on your screen, large or small, most people are not actively tracking the foreign aid question. But I want you to understand that Project 2025, I mean, you heard me read the preamble. It's a really, give them credit, it is an ambitious vision. It is an ambitious document. And so they're also coming after Medicare. And I quote, Medicare and Medicaid operate as runaway entitlements that stifle medical innovation, encourage fraud, and impede cost containment, in addition to which their fiscal future is in peril. Both programs should be managed so that the individuals enrolled are empowered to make decisions for themselves and have quality options with affordable prices driven by competition and innovation. Providers who participate should retain or have restored the freedom to practice medicine and take care of their patients according to their patients' unique needs. The Affordable Care Act has made insurance more expensive. Now, that's just flatly not true. Like, you can hate it, and you can say it's an expansion of government, and you can say that it's an inefficient way to do it, but like, it's flatly not true that people are paying more in premiums. You might hate the fact that it's a big subsidy for people. I yield the floor to the Majority Leader.
Colleague from Hawaii, Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session, be in a period of morning business for debate only, with the senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the appointment at the desk appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 11 a.m. on Tuesday, February 4th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and the Senate proceed to executive session and resume executive calendar number 12, and that all time during morning business, recess, adjournment, and leader remarks count post-closure. Further, that at 12:15 p.m., the Senate execute the order of January 30th in relation to the Collins nomination, and the Senate recess following disposition of the Collins nomination until 2:15 p.m. to allow for the weekly conference meetings. Finally, that if any nominations are confirmed during Tuesday's session, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action. If there be no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of Senator Schatz.
Without objection.
Affordable Care Act. The ACA subsidy scheme simply masks these impacts. That's a funny one. The ACA subsidy scheme masks the impacts, which is really to say we have an inefficient healthcare system. I think everybody can agree with that. And what they mean by masking the impacts, right, is we have a terrible system. Under normal circumstances, people's monthly payment would be $500, $600, $700, $900. And under the subsidy scheme, people have to pay less, masking the impacts. And so just understand there are a lot of euphemisms in here for coming after your health care. CMS, Center for Medicaid Services, Medicare and Medicaid Services, should develop a plan to separate the non-subsidized insurance market from the subsidized market, giving the non-subsidized market regulatory relief from costly ACA regulatory mandates. So let's just kind of explain what this means for a second. They want to separate the healthy from the not healthy. And the problem is, it is true that if an insurer wants to, let's say, only provide insurance for 35-year-old and under, that they're going to be able to provide really, really cheap rates. But the problem before the Affordable Care Act was that that's exactly how it worked. So if you're 23, your insurance was reasonably affordable. And if you're 48 and you have heart disease, or you have mental health challenges, or you have asthma, or you have diabetes, then you have a pre-existing condition. And then the insurance companies were able to just literally not write you a policy. You couldn't get insurance. And so the number one cause of bankruptcy pre-ACA was medical debt. People were going bankrupt because they got sick. Imagine, now it has to be a big enough thing to be expensive, so it's almost definitionally, you get sick and it's very serious. Your life might be in danger, you might have to, manage a new disability, but it's stressful and hard to try to get well or whatever it is. But on top of that, pre-ACA, you got absolutely screwed financially. And so imagine getting a terminal diagnosis and you don't have insurance, and then you're sitting there thinking, I got 3 years, but in the meantime, my family's going to go broke. Mask the impacts. What they mean is subsidize people so that they can afford their insurance and put everybody in the same risk pool so that it's not the case that sick people can't get insured and well people can't. Because why would you? The reason insurance companies love to discount their rates and take young people on their plans is it's very unlikely they're going to get sick, so they make money all the time. And the reason they wanted to reject sick people is because that ends up being expensive, right? And so it's not a surprise that the Republican Party wants to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, but we also need to understand they're coming after Medicare and Medicaid too. And I want you to hear this part from our OMB director nominee. In its opening words, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution makes it abundantly clear that the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. So far, so good. That's true. That enormous power is not vested in the departments or agencies, in staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental or other equities and interests close to the government. Now, that's where he's way off track. He's already way off track. We make laws. There is an executive branch that is a creature of federal law. And this guy's theory is, nah, we elect a king. We elect a person who doesn't have to deal with any existing statutes. How does the Department of Transportation distribute federal funds? Is it by formula or do they do grants? How does the Center for Medicare and Medicaid determine who gets grant funding for a hospital, right? All of that, over the years, has been decided as a matter of law. And what Russ Vought is saying is the president must set and enforce a plan for the executive branch. Sadly, however, a president today assumes office to find a sprawling federal bureaucracy that is all too often carrying out its own policy plans and preferences, or worse yet, the policy plans and preferences of a radical, supposedly woke faction of the country. What's interesting about this document, as I've started to read it, is it's got all this high-minded stuff, and then they just want to go after the left. Like, that's what this is, right? Like, they're just pissed. They're mad because they think certain agencies are too left-wing. They think there's a bunch of people in the government that are too busy, like, caring too much about, I don't know, healthcare or women's equality or like children's mental health, or I don't know what's considered woke and not, because I feel like with the tragic plane crash last week that those words died. Like, those words are now devoid of meaning. What in the hell does it mean to say DEI caused a plane crash? Now it's just an epithet you throw when you don't know what else to say or what to be critical of or how to be a serious person. The challenge, he says, is created and exacerbated by factors like Congress's decades-long tendency to delegate its lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies, the pervasive notion of expert independence that protects so-called expert authorities from scrutiny, the presumed inability to hold career civil servants accountable for their performance, and the increasing reality that many agencies are not only too big and powerful, but also increasingly weaponized against the public and the president, who is elected by the people and empowered by the Constitution to govern. So what they mean here, right, is that if you want to pass a law, it has to have all of the implementation in the law. And it's funny to me because a lot of Republicans will complain about the length of a law. We are supposed to make broad public policy. Let me give you a really good example. The Telecommunications Act, right, was passed and then reauthorized over the last couple of decades, and that enabled a telecommunications revolution because it set basic parameters for competition, and then it said, you, the Federal Communications Commission, expert agency, you can open up dockets, you can listen to testimony, you can evaluate individual cases. You have to work within the four corners of the statute. We're telling you what the principles are here, but like we don't know how many gigahertz of spectrum should be given to the Department of Defense versus like open RAN, this and that. We don't know that kind of thing. And I'll give you a good example from my first days in the Hawaii legislature 100 years ago. When I got to the legislature, we had a committee that was called Ocean and Marine Resources. And we, the legislature, set the minimum catch size for individual fish. And there was a pretty corrupt legislator who set the minimum catch size for an opakapaka, a kind of snapper, based on how big he wanted the snapper to be on his dinner plate. Happened to be 2 inches smaller than spawning size. Now, why do you care about spawning size? You want people to throw back a fish before it makes a bunch of eggs. And then once it's, had its spawn, then go ahead and eat it, right? And that's how you keep a healthy fishery alive. And so what we realized is, shouldn't a bunch of aquatic biologists figure out the minimum catch size of an opakapaka? Shouldn't a bunch of actual experts determine how to manage our ocean and marine resources? Shouldn't the legislature make broad policy? But you don't want us idiots talking about the minimum catch size of an opakapaka. We don't know. We have preferences. People might whisper in our ear about that. And if you can imagine the sprawling federal laws that exist about speed limits and civil penalties for contract violations and criminal law and everything else, and we're going to elucidate exactly how all of this works, it's totally preposterous. But it goes back to this idea of president as elected king. And that is where they want to go. And I quote, in Federalist 47, James Madison warned that the accumulation of all powers, legislative and executive, judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Regrettably, that wise and cautionary note describes to a significant degree the modern executive branch, which, whether controlled by bureaucracy or by the president, writes federal policy, enforces that policy, and often adjudicates, none of this is true, whether the policy was properly drafted and enforced. The overall situation is constitutionally dire, unsustainably expensive, and in urgent need of repair. Nothing less than the survival of self-governance is at stake in America. Like, they get really grandiose really quick in this document. And I think that's what's a little bone-chilling about it, is that they're not just going for conservative outcomes. They're going for a kind of revolution. And I think that, look, everybody is prone to exaggeration in campaigns. Everybody hurls accusations one side at the other. And so, like, you'll forgive me for when I heard about Project 2025, I was like, okay, some groups want us to focus on it, fine, whatever, let me check it out. And then I started to realize, like, this is really their plan. And then I heard Trump say, well, no, it's not my plan, I don't know any of these people. And I frankly didn't talk about Project 2025 during the campaign because I couldn't quite nail down were they going to do it. And now 2/3 of these nominees are authors or otherwise affiliated with this document, which is a 900-page game plan that they're in the middle of executing. And just to take a step back on the tactical side, they really do understand that a lot of what they're doing is not within the four corners of the law. They really do understand that. That's why they're moving so fast, is they are trying to create as much chaos as they possibly can. They are trying to terrorize the federal workforce. And I mean that advisedly. I have a friend, I won't even mention where he works to protect him, but he just texted me and he said, "What do I do, man? Like, I've known him since I was a kid. What do I do?" Like, just an unbelievably good human being. I don't know how he votes. I don't know if he votes. But he's terrified. So when you get this email that says fork in the road, and you're an air traffic controller, and there's a 30% vacancy rate of air traffic controllers last week, and you are encouraged to not show up for work and take a severance. That's what this is. This isn't some sort of minor policy dispute. This is arson. They believe that the federal government is an impediment to freedom. And I think we should have that argument. Like, let's have a fight. I don't mean physically. I mean, let's have a debate on the Senate floor. Is the federal government an impediment to freedom? And what parts of it? Because easy enough to say, but is it the FAA you'd like to cut? Is it Medicare you'd like to cut? Would you like to cut the Affordable Care Act subsidies? Would you like to cut the Federal Highway Administration? Would you like to cut the Department of Defense? Would you like to cut the Small Business Administration? Would you like to cut disease prevention around the world? And I think where the rubber hits the road, right, is that it's very easy. I mean, look, I'm sure plenty of Republicans could talk like me if they wanted to, and I can talk like Republicans. We sort of understand each other's points of view. But I just do think that underlying it all, we're a big, powerful country. The most powerful country that has ever existed. And in order to maintain our primacy in the world, in order to be the best in research, in order to be the best in defense, in order to be the best in innovation, we actually do need a federal government. And whether it's the patent office, or preventing Ebola from reaching our shores, or making sure we have a strong military, like all of that is in jeopardy if these particular ideologues have their way. I mean, these people are actually more ideological than some members of Congress, and I think it's pretty scary stuff because they're just going forward with it as if they have a mandate. And most of the people who got elected looked their voters square in the eye and said, "I don't know anything about this. That's not my plan. Let me tell you what my plan is." But now that all of these people are going, personnel is policy, remember, into the government to implement these plans, it's I. And then maybe secretly whispering to a Democratic colleague, I've got some concerns, so keep it up. I got some concerns, keep it up. At some point, people are going to have to stand up and say, this is not what we meant. Maybe they were pissed off at the Afghanistan withdrawal. Maybe they were pissed off at the price of eggs or the price of gasoline. Maybe they were angry that they felt that the previous president wasn't up to it. Maybe they thought Democrats were focused on the wrong things. But I don't think actually people really signed up for this. They might have tolerated it as part of a coalition. But this is not what your average swing voter thought they were signing up for. The elimination of Affordable Care Act subsidies. The storming of federal buildings. And relieving all of the senior staffers of their duties. the defying of temporary restraining orders issued by federal judges. I don't think that's what people had in mind. I think they were pissed. I think they were tired from COVID. I think they were irritated at the Democratic Party for a number of reasons. But I don't think people understood that these people had a plan that was separate and apart from the campaign. And because Donald Trump, again, very cleverly said, I got nothing to do with that, people did not think this is what the campaign was about. But now that they are in the government, that is exactly what this was about. They are in the government and they are acting as if the people ratified this plan. People need to understand what was in this plan. And I quote again, "The great challenge confronting a conservative president is the existential need for the aggressive use of vast powers of the executive branch to return power, including power currently held by the executive branch, to the American people. Success in meeting that challenge will require a rare combination of boldness and self-denial. Boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy to presidential will." Remember that email, fork in the road. And self-denial to use the bureaucratic machine to send power away from Washington and back to American families, faith communities, local governments, and states. Fortunately, a president who is willing to lead will find the executive office of the president, in the executive office of the president, the levers necessary to reverse this trend and impose a sound direction for the nation on the federal bureaucracy. The effectiveness of those EOP levers depends on the fundamental premise that it is the president's agenda that should matter to the departments and agencies that operate under his constitutional authority, and that as a general matter, it is the president's chosen advisors who have the best sense of the president's aims and intentions, both with respect to the policies he intends to enact and with respect to the interests that must be secured to govern successfully on the American people. What he is saying is that a president gets elected and he gets to do whatever the hell he wants. That's what this is. FEMA, and I quote, "The Federal Emergency Management Agency should be moved to the Department of Interior, or if combined with CISA, to the Department of Transportation." Like that one, I don't even have like a smart comment on other than like why. Like it's not going to be more efficient if you move it under DOT. And what the hell does the Federal Emergency Management Agency have to do with transportation? And it just, like, they're smart people, don't get me wrong. They're very sophisticated, smart people. They do have a plan. But some of this sounds like dorm room, like rando, like brainstorming. Yeah, we should move this over here. What does that even mean? Do you have any idea what FEMA does? Like, do you know how FEMA responds in a disaster? Have you ever met anybody who's, look, people get pissed about the federal government all the time. But when a disaster hits, I have never heard somebody say, oh, damn it, FEMA's here. People are pleased that FEMA is there. And I've had my disagreements with FEMA as it relates to the Maui recovery, but damn it, when Lahaina burned, they were there. And they were making sure people they were making sure people had food, they were making sure people had medicine, they were making sure people had a roof over their head. I mean, there are some agencies that actually work pretty well and do exactly what they're supposed to do. And so you see that this isn't about the relative efficacy of any individual department, because they are literally after them all. It doesn't matter if they work well, don't work well, or in the right place, not in the right place. They construct a critique of literally every single federal agency to sort of reduce its legitimacy. Why? Because they believe in their heart of hearts. And this is similar to what Rand Paul thinks, truly, that anytime there's any federal authority, that means less freedom for an individual. But that's not a mainstream position. This is not a mainstream document. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is that, I don't think the media has actually read this damn thing. And I think that they kind of view this as yesterday's news, last year's fight. And there's a little bit of a sense of, Democrats, they try to make something stick. They can never make something stick, so they're talking about 2025 again, and I'm going to roll my eyes and blah, blah, blah. They're implementing this thing. They're actually in the process of implementing this thing. It's all right here. FEMA manages all grants for DHS, and I quote, and these grants have become pork for states. Localities and special interest groups. Since 2002, DHS and FEMA have provided more than $56 billion in preparedness grants. Yeah, okay. Preparedness grants are awesome, actually. Talk to any governor, Democrat or Republican. Talk to any county administrator, mayor, Democrat or Republican, like, preparedness grants are awesome. We should spend $56 billion on preparedness grants. You know why? Because we just passed a $150 billion supplemental emergency appropriations bill because disasters are getting more severe and more frequent every year. Last year was the biggest disaster year on record. Now, I think it's because the climate is changing because we're burning too much fossil energy. But even if you don't think that, even if you have some magical other explanation for it, it is certainly a fact that we have more severe and more frequent disasters everywhere. And we have weird ones. There's never been a wildfire in the state of Hawaii, anything like what happened in Lahaina. A whole town burned to the ground, 2,200 structures, in not even a whole night, like 3 hours, basically. Western North Carolina, parts of West Virginia and Virginia flooded. Towns that were literally considered, like they called them climate havens. So all the people who like try to predict weather patterns were like, this is one of the very few places that's probably safe from a climate-driven natural disaster. Suddenly, Western North Carolina is absolutely flattened. And I feel really bad. I mean, Tom Tillis has been working so hard with Senator Budd to try to get some resources for people in Western North Carolina. And I feel bad because, frankly, a lot of people had been to Lahaina. And it was one discrete, beautiful town that holds a lot of, that a lot of people have a special place in their heart for the town of Lahaina, and they should. But all these towns, most people have not been to Western North Carolina. And all these towns are small. It's 500 here, 700 there, 75. Like, it's small. You add it all up, it's lots and lots and lots of people and lots and lots and lots of damage. And so preparedness grants are what they sound like. They help a county or a state or a community to, when a disaster hits, to not get wrecked, right? So like, just as an example, this is not in the preparedness grant, but like in the state of Hawaii, if you put something called a hurricane clip on your roof, the roof's way less likely to literally fly off, which is obviously bad for your house, but also bad for other houses. That's plenty. That's money that the state government provides to individuals to just say, be prepared. Why? Because it's super cheap compared to the alternative. It's super cheap compared to tens of thousands of roofs being ripped off when a Category 4 storm or hurricane hits. And so preparedness grants, like, I don't know, like that's not pork, unless you have no sense of what people actually need. And that's what this is. This is a bunch of people on K Street, primarily, downtown Washington, D.C., in their cubicles, typing up ideas about how wasteful all this stuff is. This stuff very much matters to communities. DHS, FEMA have provided more than $56 billion in preparedness grants. President Biden requested more than $3.5 billion for federal assistance grants. Again, I don't see the problem. More than any objective needs, political interests appear to direct the flow of non-disaster fund. That's just ridiculous. In fact, like if that had been the case, I would have gotten more from the Biden administration. The principle of federalism should be upheld. This indicates that states better understand. That's true. States do better understand their needs in terms of preparing for a natural disaster, but that's actually not the question. Because the way disaster preparedness, response, and recovery works is that actually the states and the counties are in charge of their preparedness, response, and recovery. It's just that when a tiny little county gets flattened and the damage is so bad that the fiscal resources of that little government can't handle it, that's when the federal government steps in. Not to dictate the recovery, but to be a backstop. I mean, this is like what a federal government is for. And I'm lingering on this one because I think it shows how disconnected these folks are. And like I said, this thing's 900 pages, and I really did intend to read the whole thing, except I found out it was going to be 120 hours. But you could go department by department and sort of know, A, that they really are trying to do all of these things, and B, that they're totally, totally disconnected from the needs of the people. Like, you could pick on a few federal agencies, and I might shrug my shoulders and go they're right. But FEMA? And the idea that a little county should be in charge of its own disaster response, that's actually preposterous. Because what you're saying then is that you're on your own. And that's freedom, to be on your own. To not have the inefficiencies of the healthcare system masked by a subsidy. You're on your own. To not have FEMA come in and backstop a little town in Maui County or in California or in West Virginia, you're on your own. Congratulations with your freedom. The freedom to get kicked off your health insurance. The freedom to not have that damned federal government intervene when your town was burned to the ground or flooded out. The freedom to make sure that if there is an Ebola outbreak in Uganda, not our problem. Sure, it's an international world. Sure, the Marburg virus is also now spreading in Eastern Africa, in Tanzania. And sure, it's got a 90% mortality rate, but you will be so satisfied with all your freedom. And I quote, "The modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people. This challenge is created and exacerbated by factors like Congress's decades-long tendency to delegate its lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies." That's not true. We're not delegating our lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies. What we are doing is establishing policy and understanding that, say in telecom, that the last thing you want is 100 people arguing about, I don't know, a spectrum auction, right? Or the worthiness of a particular bridge, right? You want experts to determine some of this, and not that we don't have a bunch of smart people, but we're supposed to make general policy. In Federalist 47, James Madison warned that the accumulation of all powers, legislative and executive and judiciary, in the same hands, or many, whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Regrettably, that wise and cautionary note describes to a significant degree the modern executive branch, which, whether controlled by the bureaucracy or the president, writes federal policy. The director must view his job, this is about the OMB director. OMB cannot perform its role on behalf of the president effectively if it is not intimately involved in all aspects of the White House policy process and lacks knowledge of what the agencies are doing. Internally to the EOP, ensuring that policy formulation procedures developed by the White House to serve the president include OMB is one of any OMB director's major responsibility. A common meme of those who intend to evade OMB review is to argue that where resources are not being discussed, OMB's participation is optional. This ignores both OMB's role in all downstream execution. You can just tell this person is no, OMB is everything. Everything goes through OMB, right? That's what this is. It's a very fancy way of saying oh, no. Fiscal, non-fiscal, budgetary, non-budgetary, everything goes through OMB. And this would be pretty boring stuff if it weren't for the fact that we're about to vote on an OMB nominee who helped to write this document, who last week was overseeing a federal funding freeze, an illegal one that was already overturned by the courts. And the White House press secretary was asked about, I forgot what programs that were necessary or popular or sympathetic. And the White House press secretary said, go talk to Russ Vought. And here's the problem. Two things. At the time, Russ Vought was not even in the government. He's not a government employee. So imagine that you have to appeal to the friend of the king for mercy. Now, I know you passed a law, but go talk to Russ Vought. I know that the federal law establishes that USAID exists and that it gets roughly $29 billion to distribute across the world: foreign military financing, economic assistance, development assistance, humanitarian aid. I know there's a law that says that, but go talk to Russ Vought. And so this document tells us what they were up to. And so I don't really I understand that we lost the argument last year. We did. We lost the argument. People didn't vote for us. Fair enough. Free and fair election, want to be very clear. I am very confident in that vote count. I didn't like it, but I'm very confident in that vote count. And I don't want to say happy, but I was determined to ratify the Electoral College count. We lost the argument about Project 2025. It kind of broke through, but people obviously didn't think it was the main thing. But it's the main thing now. Because, as the old saying goes, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Another way to say it is, Project 2025, I don't know anything about that. Oh, it turns out 2/3 of all of our nominees are very close, not adjacent to Project 2025, but authors of it, right? Wrote whole sections of it, right? The White House press secretary did training videos for Project 2025. And I don't dislike these people personally. I've never met any of these people personally. But I just want everybody to understand what this project is. This isn't some rando PDF that got uploaded to the internet and everybody ignored it. This is literally the playbook that they are following. And so I just would encourage staff, the public, members, the media to open it back up and see how much it tracks. Because if you want to know what the Trump administration is doing, and if you want to know what they're about to do next, just open up Project 2025. They are in the process of implementing this. The director must view his job as the best, most comprehensive approximation of the president's mind. It's the friggin', excuse my language, it's the king's hand, right? The best, most comprehensive approximation of the president's mind. That seems like a cool job. As it pertains to the policy agenda, while always being ready with actual options to effect that agenda within existing legal authority and resources. Well, maybe. This role cannot be performed adequately if the director acts instead as the ambassador of institutional interests of OMB and the wider bureaucracy. Once its reputation as the keeper of the commander's intent is established, then and only then does OMB have the ability to shape the most efficient way to pursue its objective. Externally, the director must ensure that OMB has sufficient visibility into the deep caverns of agency decision-making. Well, I'm sure, yeah, that's great. One indispensable statutory tool to that end is to ensure that officials, program associate directors managing the vast resource management offices personally sign what are known as apportionments. In 1870, Congress passed the Anti-Deficiency Act to prevent the common agency practice of spending down all appropriated funding, creating artificial funding shortfalls that Congress would have to fill. The law mandated that all funding be allotted or apportioned in installments. This process, whereby agencies come to OMB for allotments of appropriated funding, is essential for effective financial stewardship of taxpayer dollars. OMB can then direct, on behalf of a president, the amount, duration, and purpose of any apportioned funding to ensure against waste, fraud, and abuse, to ensure consistency with the President's agenda and applicable laws. The vast majority of these apportionments were signed by career officials, heaven forfend, career officials, oh my God, the deputy associate directors, until the Trump administration placed this responsibility within the hands of the PADs and thereby opened wide vistas of oversight that had escaped the attention of policy officials. The Biden administration subsequently reversed this decision. No director should be chosen who is unwilling to restore the apportionment decision-making to the PADs. Personal review, who is not aggressive in wielding the tool on behalf of the President's agenda or is unable to defend the power against attacks from Congress. It should be noted that each of OMB's primary functions, along with other executive and statutory roles, is carried out with the help of many essential OMB supporting offices. The two most important offices for moving OMB at the will of the director are the Budget Review Division and the Office of the General Counsel. The director should have a direct and effective relationship with the head of BRD and transmit most instructions through the office because the rest of the agency is institutionally inclined towards its direction and responds accordingly. The BRD will inevitably translate the directions from policy officials to career staff, and at every stage it is obviously vital that the director ensure that this translation is an accurate one. In addition, many key considerations involving enacting the President's agenda hinge on existing legal authorities. The director must ensure the appointment of a general counsel who is respected yet creative and fearless in his or her ability to challenge legal precedents that serve to protect the status quo. This is vital within OMB, not only with respect to the adequate development of policy options for the President's review, but also with respect to the agencies that attempt to protect their own institutional interests and foreclose certain avenues based on the mere assertion and not proof that the law disallows it or this or that. Conversely, attempts to disregard the clear statutory commands of Congress. In general, the director should empower a strong deputy director with authority over the Deputy for Management, the PADs, and the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA, to work diligently to break down barriers within OMB and not allow turf disputes or a lack of visibility to undermine the agency's principal budget management and regulatory functions. OMB should work towards a one OMB position on behalf of the President and represent that view during various policymaking processes. Now to budget. The United States faces an untenable fiscal situation and owes $31 trillion on a debt that is steadily increasing. The OMB director should present a fiscal goal to the President early in the budget development process to address the federal government's fiscal irresponsibility. This goal would help to align the months-long process of developing the actual proposals for inclusion in the budget. Though some mistakenly regard it as a mere paper-pushing exercise, the President's budget is in fact a powerful mechanism for setting and enforcing budget policy at the federal agencies. The budget team includes 6 resource management offices and so on. Let me just stop here on the question of debt and deficits. So there's a big fight that's about to happen, and it's sort of playing out in the United States House of Representatives among Republicans only. The Republicans want to pass a big tax cut, and they want to do it like they did the last tax cut, which is to shovel a bunch of money to the wealthiest corporations on the planet. I still remember that I think the Chamber of Commerce wanted, I might be getting the numbers wrong, but I think they were pushing for like a 24% top tax rate, and this Congress gave it even lower than the Chamber of Commerce wanted. Like, they're just going for it. They're going to shovel money to the wealthiest corporations to ever walk the planet. When we got power, we instituted essentially a minimum tax so that billion-dollar corporations pay at least 15%. And it generated a bunch of money, and we were able to use that for beneficial things. And so the problem now is that you've got some legit deficit hawks. You've got some legit fiscal conservatives who like tax cuts, but understand that tax cuts like reduce the amount of money coming into the government and don't engage in this magical thinking where tax cuts somehow weirdly generate more money for the government. But you've got a bunch of people who just want to deliver a tax cut and like paper over the fact that they're blowing up the deficit. But the last, I forgot what it's called, TCMJ, the tax cut, the Trump tax cuts, multi-trillion-dollar increases in the deficit. And what they're about to do is one of two things. They might do like just goofy accounting and say that continuing these tax cuts are basically free. Now, there are a bunch of Republicans in the House who basically are saying, no way, no how, we're not doing that. The problem is if you're not doing that and you're not raising revenue, then you got to cut, and you got to cut, and you got to cut. And let me tell you something. The USAID budget is not going to do it. Because it ain't $29 billion they need to find, it's $1.5 trillion that they need to find. And if you read the document that Jody Arrington in the House was distributing, it was Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, clean energy tax credits, like. And by the way, you need to do like most of those things in order to find $1.5 trillion in savings. And so you'll forgive me if I'm somewhat skeptical of these people's commitment to fiscal discipline, because every time they're in charge, they blow up the deficits. And they blow them up. Look, we did some spending. I'm not going to deny that, right? The Inflation Reduction Act was basically budget neutral, and I'm very proud of that bill. But during COVID, we obviously spent money on a deficit basis. My own view is that whatever one thinks about debt and deficits, like when it is a global pandemic and you're trying to prevent people from not being able to feed their families or pay their rent or pay their mortgage or buy their groceries or buy their medicine, that it was very reasonable for us to do deficit spending because we have that ability to keep people afloat, so we did it. And the truth is that although we experienced inflation subsequent to coming out of COVID, we did better than almost any other big economy, frankly, because we didn't underdo it. You could say we overshot it. I don't actually think that, but some people who are smart think we overshot it. But we just decided we're not going to err on the side of austerity when it's a global pandemic. And that, I think, has borne fruit. We've had a very strong economy for quite a while. It's also fair to say that prices were and remain incredibly high. But when these guys get in charge, they are suddenly very concerned with a tiny little sliver, 0.6%, something like that, 0.6% of the entire federal budget, USAID. And they are going to pass massive tax cuts that are going to either blow up the budget or they're going to find a quote-unquote pay-for. Now, what does a pay-for mean? It's just basically, okay, I'm taking away money on this side, I got to bring in money on the other side, right? There's only two ways to find a pay-for. One is you cut something you're spending money on. The other is you raise revenue, right? You raise taxes somewhere else. They're not going to raise taxes, so they're only looking at cuts, and the problem is there's actually not enough on the domestic discretionary side to find $1.5 trillion worth of savings. They couldn't pass it themselves. And this is why they can never pass an appropriations bill, is because they don't even, like, they can talk about it, but then when it comes to, like, cutting transportation, they don't want to do it, right? But what is the cataclysm that is coming is either a massive budget-busting tax cut for people who never needed it in the first place, or they're really going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the Affordable Care Act. Like, that's the plan. And I quote, "Some mistakenly regard it as a paper-pushing exercise. The president's budget is a powerful mechanism." Because RMOs are institutionally ingrained in nearly all policymaking and implementation across the executive branch, they play a critical role in helping the director to implement the president's policy agenda. However, because each RMO is responsible for formulating and supervising such a wide range of policy details, many granular but critical decisions are often effectively left to the career professionals. Like, I want you to understand, many decisions are left to the career professionals. And this is like, it's not the whole thing, but this is a big part of what we're arguing about, right? Are you okay with career professionals making decisions? I am. That sounds good to me. Give you a choice. Forget political party. Do you want political appointees or career professionals making decisions? Like, I want the career professionals. It's not to say that a new president doesn't get to drive policy. But like Region 9 of the Federal Highway Administration, and they're trying to figure out, like, I don't know, the stability of the Hanalei Bridge. I don't want political appointees determining that kind of stuff. I want experts. I want career professionals. And that is like a really foundational difference between the parties right now, is that they believe expertise is being weaponized against them. They believe that by virtue of being elected, you should have monarchical power. They believe that these people in the federal government are, I don't know, woke or something. But I've met thousands and thousands and thousands of federal employees at the shipyard, at Yokosuka Air Force Base in Japan, in Manila, at the embassy, in Jordan, at a refugee camp, in Honolulu, at the harbor. These are some of the best people I've ever met. I'm not kidding. Like, this is not like some political statement. They're just awesome. They care. Most of them could go make money someplace else. Most of them don't need this crap. Most of them have dedicated their lives to their country. And they just got an email saying, fork in the road. And so I have one simple message to federal workers. Don't give up. The law is on your side. They are trying to harass you into leaving your position. This is a hostile takeover of the federal government. And I say those words advisedly. I promise you I didn't want to land here in the second week of the Trump administration. I talked to my staff about this. I said, this guy's a lame duck. He survived a shooting. He won the popular vote in the Electoral College. Sometimes people age out of their worst behavior. I'm not being sarcastic here. I had a little sliver in my head that said, I want to at least see that every like hashtag resistance thing was not going to come to fruition. And here we are in the second week, and it is unlawful as hell. And I quote, "It is vital that the director and his political staff, not the careerists, drive these offices in pursuit of the president's actual priorities, not let them set their agenda based on the wishes of sprawling good government management community in and outside of government." That's great. Good government people, damn them. "Many directors do not properly prioritize the management portfolio, leaving it to the deputy for management, but such neglect creates the purposeless bureaucracy that impedes the president's agenda, an M train to nowhere." OFPP. "This office plays a critical role in leading the development of new policies and regulations concerning federal contracting and procurement through the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, which is generally chaired by OFPP administrator. OFPP helps the director to set a wide range of policies for all of those who contract with the executive branch. In the past, those government-wide contracting rules have played a key role in helping to implement the president's policy agenda. This office should be engaged early and often in OMB's effort to drive policy, including by obtaining transparency about entities that are awarded federal contracts and grants by using government contracts to push back against woke policies in corporate America." You can see how it like sort of sounds fine, and then suddenly they're like, whoa, push back against woke policies in corporate America. Like, the hell's that got to do with anything? And I don't even know how the Office of Management and Budget is supposed to, like, what do you care if Coca-Cola is, like, I don't know, pro-queer or something, or Pepsi, or I don't know, like some, whatever, like who cares? NBC Universal is like, wants climate action. Is that important for the federal government to have one opinion or the other about? And is it proper for the Office of Management and Budget in the executive office of the president to use the fiscal authority of the United States of America? And this, remember that this guy has this theory that he's the king's hand. He represents what the president thinks in all manners, right? And I remember, I've been a lieutenant governor, and I remember my governor, a very good friend of mine still, used to say, not for everything, by the way, but only on specific things. We'd be in a meeting, he says, he has all my authority on this. It was very generous of him. He delegated that specific authority to the lieutenant governor, and then I could represent him. What this guy's saying is the OMB director represents the President of the United States in all matters, and is going to use that to push back against woke policies in corporate America. Like, that is not a proper use of presidential power. It is not a proper view of presidential power, right? First of all, the OMB director does not represent the president in all things. That's preposterous. That's a guy who's writing this who's going, I'm going to be OMB director, I might as well represent to the world that I'm all-powerful, right? But also, what the hell's that got to do with anything? And so you see these guys have a very specific view of the world, and it's not just like, I think the government should work this way or that way. They view this as a real war. And that's what, to me, is so kind of jarring, because as I talk to Republican colleagues, like some of them probably see me as the enemy, but most of them don't. Most of them just think I've got bad ideas, like I think they've got bad ideas. But these people have a very different view of the American system of government and what's happening societally. And it's dressed up with a lot of like overeducated white shoe law firm language. But they really view the left as like an enemy. Not as just fellow Americans with like bad ideas, but the enemy. And they are going to utilize the power of the federal government to go after whatever they think is woke, right? And we saw it last week. We saw it last week, and it was so damn sad. The hardest thing to do and the easiest thing to do, in a certain sense, is when you're a public leader and something tragic happens. Hardest thing to do is to summon the strength to be kind and inspirational and convey your sense of sorrow without looking so broken up that you don't lift people up, right? So that's kind of hard. But it's also the easiest thing to do because all you have to do is be gracious. All you have to do is care about people. And the President of the United States is asked, are you going to visit the crash site? He goes, what do you want me to go swimming? Oh, do you want me to go swimming? And to blame like a really horrific plane crash. I was right here on the Senate floor giving remarks when I started to learn what happened. And the Republican cloakroom, the nonpartisan staff, everybody was just totally wrecked. And the President of the United States like blamed wokeness or DEI, diversity. I want everybody to understand what's going on here. They dress it up a bit, but they think that's the problem. They think that's the problem. They think that there are a bunch of people walking around like me or whatever, going like woke, 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 woke. I just want things to work well. I just want people to have opportunities. I want, when a disaster hits, for a community to be as prepared as possible. I want, when a disaster hits, for FEMA to be on the scene. I want our roads and highways to work properly. I want a strong defense. I want, to the extent that China is engaging in the Belt and Road Initiative, and everybody in the United States Senate talks about, wow, China is so smart. They have this Belt and Road Initiative, they're doing all this economic partnerships, and they're winning friends all over the world. We should do something like that. We are doing something like that. It's called the United States Agency for Development. It's USAID, we have it. Maybe you think it's not working well, fine, let's work on it. But we're like marveling at this thing that we already invented, that we already have, that we already do. And so I just want us all to take a breath and understand that this is either in the mainstream or it's not. This is either what we're doing or it's not. And we have a vote coming up on Wednesday and probably Thursday on Mr. Russ' vote. And I've never met him, and I don't think I've ever met him. I knew his deputy. I actually got along with his deputy. He's clearly smart. He clearly has a point of view. But, I mean, he's the Project 2025 guy. And, like, that's no longer in dispute. And my main point tonight is for everybody to get it through their heads. We are no longer arguing about whether they're doing Project 2025. They're doing it. They're doing it. They're implementing it. They have the playbook. Everything you've seen in the last 2 weeks is what they told us they were going to do. And this is not just to establish an I told you so. It's very unsatisfying in politics to do I told you so. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. It is to ask the public, is this what you thought you were getting? Maybe you thought you were getting a disruptor. Maybe you just wanted to poke, the Democratic Party in the eye because you were pissed off about, I don't know what, the price of something or Gaza or whatever. Look, people vote for you or against you for their own reasons, not yours. And so I respect the voters for electing this man. I just don't think the voters, even the ones who elected this man, had any idea that this thing was going to be implemented, and implemented so aggressively and so unlawfully. You've got places all around the country that codified a woman's right to choose and voted for Donald Trump. You've got places in this country that legalized medical cannabis or cannabis generally and then voted for Donald Trump. You've got places that voted to increase the minimum wage and voted for Donald Trump. So people voted for Donald Trump not because of these policies. They voted for Donald Trump because they didn't think he was going to do it. Honestly, I know people, look, in the first Trump round, I didn't have very many buddies that voted for Trump. This last round, I had a few. I didn't even ask because it would have been a little bit of a strain on our fantasy football relationships and our text strings and all the rest of it. But I could tell. And it's because they didn't think he was going to do any of these things. And I just want everybody to understand he's doing them all. And he's doing them rapidly, and he's doing at least some of them illegally. And so we're going to have more to say about this over the next couple of days. But I just want everybody to understand this is a marker. This is what they're doing. They're implementing Project 2025, and Mr. Russ Vogt is the head of this thing. And according to the document itself, he views this job, which, let's be honest, nobody knows who the OMB director is, right? Nobody knows who the OMB director is. Nobody even knows what OMB is. But that's why this thing is so important, is that this guy has decided, this is the document that is governing how the Trump administration is going forward, and this guy has a very specific view of this job, which is everything goes through OMB. It is the consolidating place for presidential power. He represents the president in all things. And so we are getting very, very close to this person being able to realize every single aspect of Project 2025. And some of it, by the way, what they're doing with USAID is even worse than the document. They actually call for reform of USAID in this document. What they're doing is actually eliminating the department. And I'll yield to the...
I'm just going to ask the gentleman to yield for a question. Well, we've seen just this shadow government sort of trying to change America inside out, run the show, and as you said, put power in one man, not with the usual checks and balances that we've known for America and has existed through Democratic and Republican administrations. And my first question is, has the gentleman from Hawaii seen anything like what they did with AID in terms of just totally eliminating it, being cruel to the people who work there, not understanding the security implications to the country, and just coming in and just shutting down the whole place? Has he ever seen anything like that in all the years that we've had American history even?
No, and I thank the Democratic leader for his leadership on this. And I'll just say, I think the idea of getting rid of USAID is a radical one and a wrong one. But that's actually not what we're arguing about. They stormed into the offices and purged the staff and took over the servers, and we do think entered the SCIFs. And so, I mean, this is the kind of thing that if you read about it in the newspaper would sound like it was in a country that was falling apart.
And would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
And it's similar. We see it repeated in place after place after place. When Doge came into the Treasury Department and said they're going to control all of the funding and who is getting paid what, Social Security payments and Medicare payments and so much else that goes out. Again, isn't this unparalleled in what we've seen?
It truly is, and thank the leader. It is absolutely unparalleled, and the idea that someone from Doge, we don't even really know who it is, basically barged their way in, had a very contentious negotiation with the Treasury Secretary, and now they have access to the federal payments database. They have no expertise. There are only 5 people in the federal government that have this kind of access, and somebody was just granted it.
And they've gotten chosen without any checks or balances, without ever coming before the Senate, without anything else, and they have huge power. And people's privacy is at risk. But also, we don't even know if they've made protections so that China or Russia or some other country could look at all this information and use it. And then the next step could well be even worse. They could just decide, I'll cut this, I'll cut that, I'll cut this. We're finding something wrong with it and come right in. I mean, this is just outrageous. And to boot, we used to have some check called the IG, the Inspector General, who would be in a department and say, you're doing something wrong, you shouldn't do it. And isn't it true that they've eliminated this IG? So this is virtually unchecked power by a small group of people that no one knows who they are, what they believe in, what they're doing. They could have huge consequences and hurt average working people. This isn't something just, up in government of 2 parties fighting. This could hurt average American families who get Social Security, who get Medicaid, who are veterans, in issue after issue after issue where the federal government is involved. You could find just decimation.
It's true, and the firing of the IGs was not just a random, like, I don't like those guys kind of a firing. It is a precursor to corruption. They literally got rid of the watchdogs, and then they stormed the building. And I just want everybody to understand that, and the leader's exactly right. It's OMB and it's IG, and so like a lot of people out there in the public are like, I can't sort out of this. Think of it this way. They got rid of the watchdogs, and then they stormed the building and took control of the servers and the data.
If you're a member, for instance, would the gentleman continue to yield, say a group that gets veterans health care, and all of a sudden they said, the money's not being spent right, we're cutting it off. You almost have no recourse unless we get rid of this. And as I may have mentioned to my friend from Hawaii, the leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, and I will be introducing legislation to undo this, and we are going to fight like the devil to get this done, because this is just a crisis from one end of America to the other. It's this shadow government of people, we don't know who they are, what they believe in, and they've just come and stormed in. It is outrageous and dangerous. And Would the gentleman agree with those two assessments?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things that everyone's got to wrap their mind around is you might have voted for Donald Trump for whatever set of reasons, but I don't think you signed up for a bunch. It's not just that billionaires are influencing the government. That would be one thing, but it wouldn't be that unusual. Billionaires are in charge of the mechanics of the government. That's different. That's very scary stuff.
We don't even know if these billionaires have any understanding of how a feeding program works, how Medicaid works, how a veterans program works, how we fund the police, how we help our firefighters. Almost no understanding. Just with an idea, oh, we want to slash, which was in Doge and I think in Project 2025, $2 trillion. We don't care how, where, or when we get there, who it hurts. We just want to do it because very wealthy people don't want to pay taxes, and so they just want to cut spending. But the spending is not just wasteful spending. It's things that help American families day in, day out. One of their other proposals, I love this one, privatize Fannie and Freddie. They're the people that give lower mortgage. Because there's a government guarantee, there's a lower mortgage rate. So many younger families really want to buy a home. They can't because it's expensive. This will make it even more expensive. You go issue after issue after issue in Project 2025, and then you look at the power these 5 unknown people will have over the entire budget, many of them trying to implement 2025, and this is the way they do it, and it's frightening.
It's really frightening, and I think about last week when before the federal funding freeze was deemed unlawful and suspended. You know, people couldn't get their VA home loans, and we've all had like that moment where you're like, okay, it's closing day, and the VA home loan office was not available for you to execute on your loan to get your house.
The Medicaid portal was shut down. People who desperately needed Medicaid and need to get some information and get some help were told, go home. Now they put it back up, but who knows when they'll shut it down again.
Yeah. Look, I think our job over the next couple of days, and the leader has been very strong on this, is to point out that, look, I've never seen a floor fight over the OMB director. And there's a reason for that, is because that's usually some nonpartisan job, and they might have, you know, they're important, and you want them to be good at it. But this guy views OMB as a consolidated locus of power on behalf of the president to fight woke or whatever.
You views it as a bludgeon, as a consolidated bludgeon where he can just cut, hurt people in so many different ways you can't even count them. And I am so glad that we had the Democrats, every Democrat who was here tonight voted against vote, but every Republican voted for him. And people have to realize that they're voting for the guy who said what he would do in Project 2025, hurt all of your constituents if you're in a red state, blue state, purple state, and they're going along with it. It's amazing. So I really thank my colleague for all the good work and the speech and the talk he's given here. And I wanted to come out and lend some support, say right on, and we're going to keep fighting.
We're not done, but I yield the floor.
The Senate stands adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.